Marcus Reed had spent 15 years protecting his company's most sensitive data. One late night at the office turned into a public accusation when his CEO used a single video clip to claim Marcus had leaked corporate secrets. In court, prejudice spoke louder than proof. But Marcus stayed calm. While they judged him, he investigated quietly. Laser logs, erased footage, tire tracks, and a secret payment exposed the real traitor, the executive assistant. Marcus was cleared, but he chose dignity over revenge, reminding the court that respect matters more than money. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Chicago, in early November, carried a sharp, restless wind off Lake Michigan. The sky hung low and gray above the glass towers of downtown, and the streets shimmered from a thin morning rain that had just stopped. People moved quickly along the sidewalks, collars turned up, coffee cups in hand. It was the kind of cold that slipped under your coat and stayed there. Marcus Reed had always liked mornings like this. At 38, Marcus stood a little over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered but lean, the result of years of disciplined routines rather than vanity. His skin was a deep brown, his jawline strong and clean-shaven, his dark eyes steady and observant. He wore tailored suits in understated colors, charcoal, navy, black, never flashy, always precise. Colleagues often described him as calm, almost unreadable, but those who knew him understood the quiet warmth beneath his reserved exterior. Marcus had grown up on the south side of Chicago, the son of a postal worker and a nurse. Hard work had not been optional in his household, it had been survival. A scholarship had carried him through university. A relentless work ethic had carried him into North River Analytics, one of the city's fastest-growing data strategy firms. Over 15 years, he had become the company's senior cybersecurity architect, the man trusted to guard its most sensitive information. Or so he thought. The call came at 6:42 a.m. He was standing in the kitchen of his modest brick home in Hyde Park when his phone vibrated on the counter. His wife, Angela Reed, was pouring coffee into 2 ceramic mugs. Angela, 36, was tall and slender, with warm brown skin and natural curls pulled neatly into a low bun. Her eyes, dark and expressive, reflected both kindness and strength. She taught history at a local high school, and years of navigating crowded classrooms had given her a steady, patient demeanor. But beneath that composure was a woman shaped by experience. As a child, she had watched her own father unfairly dismissed from a factory job. Injustice was not abstract to her, it was personal. Marcus glanced at the screen. The caller ID read, William Carter. Angela noticed the shift in his posture. "That early?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded once and answered. William Carter's voice came through tight and controlled. William was 55. Tall but slightly stooped from long hours behind executive desks. His hair, once thick and blonde, had thinned and turned silver at the temples. His pale blue eyes were sharp, calculating. He wore authority like a tailored coat, comfortable, practiced, unquestioned. To investors, he was decisive. To employees, he could be charismatic. But under pressure, that charm often hardened into impatience. "Marcus," William said, "we have a serious problem. I need you downtown, immediately." No explanation, no context. By the time Marcus arrived at North River's headquarters, a 40-story glass tower overlooking the Chicago River, the lobby buzzed with unusual tension. People avoided eye contact. Conversation stopped when he passed. On the 32nd floor, in the executive conference room, William stood beside a large screen. Seated near him was Ethan Blake. Ethan Blake, 42, was of average height with sandy brown hair always styled neatly back. His build was trim, his suits expensive but understated. He had a smooth, approachable face, the kind that inspired easy trust. As executive assistant to the CEO, Ethan had built a reputation as efficient, discreet, loyal. He spoke softly, smiled often, and rarely revealed what he was thinking. When Marcus entered, Ethan's eyes flickered toward him. Briefly, then away. William didn't waste time. "Last night," he began, "our competitor, Orion Metrics, launched a proposal identical to the strategy we finalized internally 2 weeks ago. Identical, Marcus." Marcus felt the words land, but kept his expression steady. "That data was restricted," William continued. "3 people had authorized access. You, me, Ethan." He clicked the remote. Security footage filled the screen. It showed Marcus walking down a dimly lit corridor outside the company's data vault at 11:48 p.m. The timestamp glowed in the corner. He appeared alone, calm, focused. "That's me leaving," Marcus said evenly. "I was running diagnostics. I logged it." William's jaw tightened. "And yet," he said, "the breach occurred within an hour." Silence pressed against the room. "You were the only one physically present before the leak," William added. Marcus met his gaze. "Are you accusing me?" William didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "The board has voted to initiate legal action pending investigation." The words echoed. Legal action. By noon, the internal emails had circulated. By evening, media outlets were reporting that a senior cybersecurity executive at North River Analytics was under investigation for corporate espionage. At home, Angela stood in her classroom after the final bell, staring at her phone as notifications flooded in. Parents had begun emailing. A colleague had gently asked if she was doing okay. The tone was polite, but distant. At school, 12-year-old Noah Reed felt it too. Noah was tall for his age, with his father's steady eyes and his mother's thoughtful expression. He wore his hair in short, tight curls and carried himself with quiet confidence. He loved robotics and sketching comic book heroes in the margins of his notebooks. But that afternoon, 2 boys in his class whispered loud enough for him to hear, "Isn't your dad the guy who stole company secrets?" Noah didn't answer. He just stared at his desk until the bell rang. Back downtown, formal charges were filed within 48 hours. The courtroom on Clark Street was colder than the November air outside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rows of wooden benches filled slowly with reporters and curious onlookers. Marcus sat beside his attorney, Lisa Monroe. Lisa Monroe was 44, African-American with sharp cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes behind thin rectangular glasses. She wore her hair in a sleek, shoulder-length style and favored navy suits with subtle silver jewelry. Known for her composure and methodical mind, Lisa had built her career defending professionals wrongfully accused. Years earlier, she had watched her own mentor lose a case because a jury chose instinct over evidence. Since then, she trusted facts above emotion. She leaned slightly toward Marcus. "They have one video," she said quietly. "That's not proof. It's presence." Across the aisle, William Carter took the stand. He spoke clearly, projecting confidence. "The integrity of our company was compromised," he told the court. "Mr. Reed was the only individual on site before the data breach. I had concerns." "Concerns based on what?" Lisa asked during cross-examination. William hesitated, only briefly. "Based on motive," he said. "And what motive would that be?" Lisa pressed. William's expression hardened. Discontent, ambition, perhaps resentment. Marcus remained still. Then William added words that shifted the air in the room. "People like him," he said, voice lower now, "aren't always loyal." The phrase hung there. People like him. A few gasps. A reporter's pen paused mid-stroke. Even Ethan Blake shifted slightly in his seat. Lisa's eyes flashed, but her voice remained controlled. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Reed's character is determined by his race?" William cleared his throat. "I'm suggesting that trust must be earned." Marcus stood slowly. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady. "I request that the court require concrete evidence. Not suspicion, not personal belief, evidence." The judge nodded, but made no immediate ruling. Outside the courthouse, wind whipped across the plaza. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. Marcus shielded his family from the chaos as best he could. Angela held Noah's hand tightly. That night, at home, silence filled the living room. The television was off. The house felt smaller somehow. Noah finally looked up at his father. "Dad?" he asked softly. "Did you do it?" Marcus knelt to meet his son's eyes. "No," he said. "And the truth doesn't change just because someone doubts it." Angela watched them, fear and resolve mingling in her expression. The accusation had been spoken publicly. The damage had begun. The courtroom battle was only starting, but Marcus Reed was not a man who ran from storms. And outside, Chicago's wind continued to rise. The wind outside the courthouse had not settled since the first hearing, but inside Marcus Reed, something steadier had taken hold. If Chapter 1 had been shock, Chapter 2 was resolve. He did not shout. He did not defend himself with emotion. He asked for proof. 3 days after the first session, the courtroom reconvened under heavier press coverage. Reporters lined the hallway, their questions sharper now. Marcus walked past them in a dark navy suit, posture straight, expression controlled. The storm around him had grown louder, but his movements remained deliberate, almost surgical. Years of cybersecurity had trained him to think in systems, not chaos, and right now, the system mattered. Beside him, Attorney Lisa Monroe carried a thick leather folder, her heels clicking evenly against the courthouse floor. She had not slept much. The faint shadow beneath her eyes suggested it, but her focus was unbroken. Lisa had spent the last 48 hours reviewing North River's infrastructure documentation. Something about the company's narrative felt incomplete. Too simple. When the judge allowed Lisa to address the court, she stood without theatrics. "Your Honor, we formally request comprehensive forensic access to the company's internal security systems. The accusation relies on a single hallway clip. That is insufficient." Across the aisle, William Carter sat rigidly, his fingers interlocked on the table. His suit was immaculate, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed tension. He did not like losing control of a narrative. Lisa continued. "North River's data vault is not a standard office door. It is a layered security environment." She projected a diagram onto the screen. Marcus watched quietly as the architecture appeared. It felt almost personal seeing it displayed publicly. He had helped design parts of it. "First," Lisa said, "the corridor leading to the vault is protected by motion-sensitive laser grids calibrated to detect human presence. Second, the vault door requires biometric retinal authentication. Only 3 individuals are registered in that system: Mr. Reed, Mr. Carter, and Mr. Blake." At the mention of his name, Ethan Blake shifted slightly in his chair. Ethan looked composed as always, his sandy hair perfectly parted, his face neutral. But those who studied him closely might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. He kept his hands folded neatly, fingers still. "Third," Lisa added, "multiple hallway cameras cover the approach to the vault." She paused, letting the structure sink in. "And yet," she said, "we are presented with a single edited clip." The judge leaned forward. "Edited?" "Yes, Your Honor. The close-angle footage nearest the vault door is missing from the system logs. Only a mid-corridor clip remains, the one showing Mr. Reed walking past." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. William's voice cut in. "Technical errors happen." Lisa did not look at him. "They rarely delete only the angles that matter." Marcus felt something subtle shift in the room. For the first time, the accusation did not feel absolute. It felt incomplete. After the session, outside on the courthouse steps, The wind carried the scent of rain again. Chicago's skyline looked colder, sharper. Reporters tried to corner Marcus with microphones. "Mr. Reed, did you tamper with the system yourself? Are you blaming your CEO?" Marcus stopped just long enough to answer one question. "I am asking for evidence," he said calmly. "That's all." Back at home that evening, Angela Reed sat at the dining table with Marcus's old company laptop open in front of her. She had requested access to archived emails he had forwarded to his personal account months earlier. Routine practice, nothing secretive. Angela was not a cybersecurity expert, but she was meticulous. Years of grading essays had trained her eye for patterns and inconsistencies. She scrolled slowly. There they were. Email after email from Marcus to upper management recommending security upgrades. Suggestions to reinforce external monitoring. Warnings about potential internal vulnerabilities. Proposals to update camera redundancy in sensitive corridors. He had even written one memo 6 months earlier titled, "Preventing Insider Exploitation of Biometric Access Systems." Angela exhaled softly. The irony almost hurt. She began organizing the emails chronologically, highlighting key lines. Her movements were quiet, efficient. Teaching history had taught her that records mattered. Documentation mattered. Stories without paper trails were easily rewritten. In his bedroom upstairs, Noah Reed sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by wires, circuit boards, and a half-assembled robotics kit. His brow was furrowed in concentration. The science fair announcement had been posted 2 weeks ago, but only now did the theme feel urgent. "Ethics in Technology," he murmured, writing the title on a notepad. Noah had always admired his father's job, though he didn't fully understand it. To him, Marcus was the man who protected invisible things. Now that protection felt threatened. Instead of retreating, Noah leaned in. He decided his project would explore how technology could be misused when oversight failed. He began sketching a prototype system that logged ethical accountability checks, an automated transparency monitor. Downstairs, Angela glanced toward the staircase, listening to the faint hum of her son's soldering iron. It gave her comfort. Pain was present in the house, but so was resilience. The next day, Lisa arranged to consult an external security analyst, Dr. Howard Klein. Dr. Klein was a 50-year-old cybersecurity consultant with thinning dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. He had the distracted air of someone whose mind ran faster than his body. Slightly overweight, perpetually carrying a tablet under one arm, he had built his reputation dissecting corporate breaches that others misdiagnosed. Years earlier, he had testified in a federal case exposing a falsified data trail, and since then, companies either respected him or feared him. They met in Lisa's office overlooking the Chicago River. Outside, gray clouds moved slowly overhead. Dr. Klein reviewed the partial logs Lisa had secured through court order. He muttered, fingers tapping rapidly. "Interesting." "What?" Lisa asked. "The laser grid system logs show normal operation until 11:41 p.m. Then there's a brief recalibration entry. 4 minutes long. After that, everything resumes." "Recalibration?" Marcus asked. "That can happen during maintenance," Klein replied, "but it usually leaves a longer signature. This one's clean." "Too clean," Lisa pressed. He nodded. "It's like someone wanted it to look routine." Marcus absorbed the information carefully. He did not jump to conclusions. That was never his style. But he understood systems intimately. Systems did not erase selectively without cause. "What about the retinal scanner?" Lisa asked. Dr. Klein scrolled further. "Access records show one successful authentication at 11:52 p.m. Marcus frowned slightly. "That's not me. I left at 11:48. "Authentication logs can be spoofed if someone has administrative override privileges," Klein said thoughtfully. "But only someone with high-level internal knowledge would attempt that." Back in the courtroom later that week, Lisa requested the court compel North River to produce full, unedited server backups. William objected. "This is a fishing expedition." Lisa turned to face him directly for the first time. "No, it is an investigation." The judge granted limited expansion of discovery. The momentum was subtle but undeniable. That night, Marcus stood alone by the living room window, watching headlights sweep across the wet street outside. Angela joined him silently, resting her hand against his back. "They're starting to listen," she said. Marcus nodded once. "They should have listened from the beginning." Angela hesitated. "Do you ever doubt that justice will actually work?" He looked at her, not with anger, but with certainty. "I've spent my life building systems that assume failure is possible," he said. "But I've also seen systems corrected when people refuse to back down. I didn't do this, and I won't carry it quietly." Upstairs, Noah taped a small handwritten note to the front of his science board. "Integrity means doing what is right when no one is watching." The house settled into silence again. Outside, the wind shifted direction. The accusation still stood. The public suspicion had not vanished. But now there were cracks, technical, procedural, logical cracks, and Marcus Reed remained standing. The courtroom continued its slow, procedural rhythm, but outside its walls another process had begun. Quieter, sharper, and far less visible. Marcus Reed had learned long ago that waiting for systems to correct themselves was rarely enough. Sometimes you built a second system. 3 nights after Dr. Klein's preliminary review, Marcus met with a private digital forensics firm in a discreet office building near Wacker Drive. The firm operated without flashy signage, only a frosted glass door that read, Halverson Analytics Group. The founder, Ingrid Halverson, was in her late 40s, tall and angular with short ash-blonde hair cut blunt at the jaw. Her posture was upright, almost military, and her pale gray eyes missed very little. Years earlier, she had worked for a federal cybercrime task force before leaving over what she once described as political compromise. Since then, she had built a reputation for precision and discretion. She did not speak more than necessary. Beside her stood Daniel Cho, 32, compact and wiry, with thick black hair and sharp, observant eyes behind round glasses. Daniel had grown up in Silicon Valley, a self-taught coder by age 14. He possessed the restless energy of someone who processed data faster than conversation. Where Ingrid was restrained, Daniel was analytical curiosity embodied. Marcus explained only what was necessary. "I need independent verification," quietly. Ingrid nodded once. "We don't chase rumors. We chase artifacts." Within 48 hours, the team began reconstructing fragments of North River's environment using the limited logs obtained through court discovery. They could not access the live system directly, but patterns leave fingerprints. The first anomaly surfaced in the parking garage. North River's underground garage had high-resolution security coverage at entry points, though the vault corridor cameras were compromised. Daniel isolated footage from the west entrance ramp at 11:37 p.m., the night of the breach. "There," he said, enlarging the frame. A dark SUV entered the garage slowly. The plate was partially obscured by glare, but Ingrid requested enhancement processing. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I don't recognize that vehicle," he said. "Give it time," Ingrid replied. The second discovery came not from video, but from texture. The garage floor was polished concrete, but faint tire residue remained in areas where moisture accumulated from that week's rain. Daniel overlaid tire pattern databases used in insurance investigations. The tread matched a high-end European SUV model, not common among North River's mid-level employees. Meanwhile, Ingrid examined still frames near the elevator bank. "There's a shoe imprint," she said quietly. Near the elevator threshold, barely visible in a reflected light angle, was a distinct sole pattern. Geometric hexagonal grips, uncommon in standard office footwear. Marcus felt something shift internally. That's not random. No, Ingrid agreed. It isn't. Back in court that week, proceedings continued methodically. William Carter maintained his posture of controlled authority, though his public statements had become more cautious since Lisa's security diagram presentation. He avoided direct eye contact with Marcus now. Ethan Blake remained outwardly composed. His tailored suits were crisp as ever. He kept his hands folded neatly, rarely speaking unless addressed. But Ingrid had asked for something else. Background anomalies, she had said. Lisa Monroe, persistent as ever, had begun examining Ethan's communications through subpoenaed phone metadata. She did not yet have full transcripts, but call duration and frequency alone told stories. In her office, late at night, Lisa sat beneath a single desk lamp reviewing printed call logs. She had changed out of her heels hours ago, now barefoot on the cool hardwood floor. A yellow legal pad lay open beside her. She circled a pattern. Ethan Blake had placed multiple late-night international calls in the weeks leading up to the breach. Switzerland, Singapore. One recurring number registered through a corporate proxy service. Lisa's instincts sharpened. She had built her career on reading what people tried to hide between lines. Years earlier, she had defended a hospital administrator falsely accused of negligence. The real culprit had been an internal compliance officer manipulating oversight reports. Since then, she trusted one principle: proximity breeds opportunity. Across town, Angela Reed sat at the kitchen table again, though her posture had changed from anxiety to suspicion. She was not trained in law enforcement, but she was observant. She had begun replaying conversations in her mind. The way Ethan had once commented casually at a company holiday party about how fragile loyalty can be in competitive markets. The way William had deferred to Ethan in small executive matters more often than publicly acknowledged. Angela was tall and poised, but now her movements carried sharper edges. Injustice had stirred something old inside her, the memory of her father's quiet dismissal years ago. She had learned then that accusations often protect someone else's secret. "This isn't just about Marcus," she murmured to herself. Upstairs, Noah worked on his ethics project with increasing intensity. He had added a new feature to his prototype, a log that flagged irregular override patterns in administrative systems. He didn't know it, but the concept mirrored what Marcus's independent team was discovering. Back at Halverson Analytics, Ingrid analyzed the laser grid recalibration entry more deeply. It wasn't maintenance, she concluded. It was intentional suppression. The system logs showed the motion sensors had been disabled for exactly 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Not 3 minutes. Not 5. 4 minutes and 3 seconds. That's the minimum time needed to move from the corridor entry to the vault and back without triggering alert protocols, Daniel said. Marcus exhaled slowly. Only someone familiar with the architecture would know that window. Ingrid nodded. Correct. The retinal authentication record posed a subtler problem. A successful scan was logged at 11:52 p.m., but embedded timestamp metadata suggested slight manipulation. The nanosecond registration markers were inconsistent with the server clock's baseline. Someone adjusted the entry, Daniel explained. It still reads valid, but the micro-timing doesn't align. Marcus felt the weight of it settle. This was not an outsider breach. This was internal. In court, none of this had yet been presented. The silent investigation remained exactly that. Silent. Marcus understood timing. Evidence introduced prematurely could be dismissed. One evening, as Marcus stood in the backyard watching bare tree branches sway against the cold sky, Angela joined him. "You're thinking about someone specific," she said. "I'm thinking about access," Marcus replied carefully. "About who benefits." Angela folded her arms against the chill. "Do you trust Carter?" Marcus considered. "I trusted the structure. I'm not sure about the people." Meanwhile, Lisa reviewed the international call metadata again. One number connected repeatedly to a consulting entity recently acquired by Orion Metrics, the competitor who had launched the identical proposal. Lisa leaned back slowly. Coincidence was thinning, but no accusations were made, no names spoken aloud in court. The investigation was still forming its spine. The next morning, Ingrid sent Marcus a concise message. Tire pattern traced to limited regional ownership. Cross-reference pending. Marcus read it twice before locking his phone. In the courtroom later that day, as proceedings adjourned, Ethan Blake stood to gather his papers. For the first time since the case began, Marcus studied him closely, not as a colleague, but as a variable. Ethan's face was composed, but his fingers lingered a fraction too long on his briefcase clasp. Outside, Chicago's sky had cleared briefly, revealing pale winter sunlight reflecting off the river. The city moved forward as it always did, unaware of the quiet machinery turning beneath one corporate scandal. Marcus walked beside Lisa toward the courthouse steps. "We're getting closer," she said softly. He nodded. "But we move carefully." Behind them, cameras clicked. Ahead of them, the wind carried a sharper chill. The accusation still stood publicly, but beneath the surface, the silent investigation had begun to breathe. And it was no longer directionless. Chicago's winter light had turned sharper, almost metallic, reflecting off the frozen edges of the river. The city no longer felt restless. It felt watchful. Inside Halverson Analytics Group, the quiet hum of servers replaced the sound of wind. Patterns were beginning to align. Ingrid Halverson stood before a wide digital display, arms crossed, her tall frame silhouetted by the glow of data overlays. Her movements were economical, precise. She did not celebrate conclusions, she verified them. Daniel Cho sat at a workstation nearby, fingers moving rapidly across keys, eyes darting between datasets. "It's confirmed," Daniel said, voice tight with focus. "The tire tread matches a 2023 Volterra X7, limited import. Less than 200 registered in Illinois." Marcus stood still, absorbing the information. "How many within Chicago city limits?" 17, Daniel replied. "Cross-referencing corporate parking permits now." Ingrid turned slightly toward Marcus. "North River's executive parking database is publicly filed with city compliance. We checked." She tapped the screen. A list of vehicle registrations appeared. Among them, Ethan Blake. Make, Volterra X7. Color, midnight graphite. Registered address, downtown condominium on East Wacker. Marcus did not speak immediately. He had expected anomalies. But expectation and confirmation were different weights. Daniel zoomed in on the parking garage footage again. The dark SUV entering at 11:37 p.m. matched the body contour, roofline, and distinctive rear light signature of the Volterra X7. "That's not coincidence," Daniel said quietly. Ingrid nodded. "It's probability narrowing." The shoe imprint came next. Daniel had enhanced the elevator bank reflection further, isolating the sole pattern. Ingrid accessed a retail database that tracked premium footwear imports. The hexagonal grip configuration belonged to a European luxury brand rarely stocked outside high-end boutiques. Marcus remembered something faint. Ethan once joking at a board dinner about preferring Italian craftsmanship over American bulk. It had seemed trivial at the time. "Brand is Arvelli," Ingrid stated. "Retail price average $800, limited distribution." Lisa Monroe, who had joined them for the briefing, opened a folder and slid a printed image across the table. It was taken from a company gala 6 months earlier. Ethan Blake stood beside William Carter, smiling politely, his suit immaculate. On his feet were unmistakable Arvelli shoes. Lisa's jaw tightened slightly. He wore them often. Marcus felt no triumph, only clarity. But the final fracture came not from tread or leather. It came from money. Lisa had filed a motion requesting preliminary financial review based on suspicious call patterns. Though the court had not yet granted full subpoena power, limited transactional summaries were accessible through public filings and compliance reports. Back in her office that evening, Lisa sat upright at her desk, shoulders squared, reading a thin financial summary with increasing stillness. Ethan Blake's personal account showed a recent deposit, $2.4 million, originating from a Delaware-based consulting entity, Marston Advisory Group. Lisa searched corporate registries. Marston Advisory Group had been incorporated 8 months earlier. Its primary client, Orion Metrics. Lisa leaned back slowly. Years of legal practice had taught her that people betray systems for many reasons: fear, resentment, ambition. But large sums leave footprints no matter how carefully disguised. The next morning, she requested an emergency motion before the judge to expand financial subpoena authority. In court, William Carter's composure faltered for the first time. He sat straighter than usual, his silver hair meticulously combed, but his fingers tapped lightly against the polished wood of the defense table. The controlled executive had begun to look less certain. When Lisa formally stated her request for Ethan Blake's financial records, the courtroom grew noticeably still. William's attorney objected immediately. "This is an unfounded diversion." Lisa's voice did not rise. "We have vehicle correlation, footwear correlation, and suspicious international communications. Financial transparency is not diversion. It is due process." The judge considered, then granted preliminary access pending review. Across the aisle, Ethan Blake remained unnervingly calm. His posture did not shift. His hands remained folded neatly. His sandy hair was immaculate, his expression neutral. But his eyes, just briefly, flicked toward William. Later that afternoon, in a private executive conference room at North River, William Carter summoned Ethan. The room overlooked the Chicago River, sunlight reflecting harshly against the glass. William stood by the window, his tall frame rigid. "You assured me," William said quietly, "that this would remain contained." Ethan's expression did not change. He remained seated, legs crossed neatly, voice smooth. "It will," he replied. William turned sharply. "They're digging into your finances." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Then we ensure there is nothing illegal to find." William studied him for a long moment. In all their years working together, Ethan had been reliable, efficient, discreet. He had managed investor calls, strategic rollouts, confidential negotiations. William had trusted him implicitly. Now, for the first time, doubt flickered. But doubt alone was not proof. Meanwhile, across town at Noah's middle school, the gymnasium buzzed with anticipation. Folding chairs lined the floor, science fair boards displayed in careful rows. Parents murmured, teachers adjusted clipboards. Noah stood beside his presentation board titled, "Truth Requires Protection: Ethical Oversight in Digital Systems." He wore a navy sweater and neatly pressed slacks, his posture straight despite visible nerves. His eyes, so similar to Marcus's, held quiet determination. Beside him stood Ms. Karen Whitfield, the science teacher overseeing the competition. Karen was in her early 40s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and a calm, encouraging presence. Years earlier, she had left a corporate engineering role to teach after witnessing ethical shortcuts in product testing. Since then, she had made integrity a cornerstone of her classroom. Noah explained his prototype to the judges, a system that logged override privileges separately, flagging unusual access patterns in real time. "Because sometimes," Noah said steadily, "the person with access is the one you least expect." The judges exchanged impressed glances. By evening, Noah's project won first place. But more powerful than the ribbon was his closing statement. "When systems fail," he said into the small microphone, "it's not always because they're weak. Sometimes it's because someone strong decides to misuse them. That's why truth always needs protection." A parent recorded the speech. Within hours, it circulated online, shared quietly at first, then more widely as context about Marcus's case spread. Back in the city's legal district, Ingrid sent Marcus a concise update. Financial link established, awaiting full subpoena. Marcus read it slowly. He stood by his office window at home, watching snow begin to fall lightly across the backyard. Each flake landed silently, accumulating without drama. Angela joined him, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold seeping through the glass. "Something's changed," she said softly. "Yes," Marcus replied. He did not speak Ethan's name, not yet. But the pattern was no longer abstract. In the courtroom the next morning, tension was different, not explosive, but tightening. Lisa's motion for full financial subpoena authority was under review. William Carter avoided Marcus's eyes entirely. Ethan Blake entered with the same measured pace as always, but his calmness had become almost theatrical. The cracks had not yet shattered the case, but they were visible now. Vehicle, footwear, money, and systems, Marcus knew, collapse when pressure finds their weakest point. He remained seated, posture straight, hands folded calmly in front of him. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He waited. Snow fell lightly over downtown Chicago the morning the courtroom filled beyond capacity. News vans lined the curb. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder beneath gray skies, their breath visible in the cold air. Inside, the courtroom felt warmer but heavier, as if everyone sensed the weight of what was about to unfold. Marcus Reed entered without looking toward the cameras. He wore a charcoal suit, pressed and simple. His posture was upright, but not rigid. His expression revealed neither anger nor anticipation, only focus. Years of discipline had trained him to conserve energy for the right moment. Behind him walked Angela Reed, tall and composed, her long wool coat draped neatly over her shoulders. Though anxiety had carved subtle lines at the corners of her eyes over the past weeks, she carried herself with steady dignity. She had chosen a deep burgundy dress that morning, strong but restrained. At her side was Noah, dressed in a navy blazer slightly too large for his still-growing frame. He held himself carefully, aware that this was not just a family matter but a public one. His eyes were clearer now than they had been days earlier. Across the aisle sat William Carter. He appeared more fragile than before. His silver hair was combed back precisely, but the firmness in his posture had softened. His hands rested flat on the table, as though steadying himself. Control had always been his strength. Today, it seemed thinner. Beside him sat Ethan Blake. Ethan wore a dark, tailored suit, perfectly fitted as always. His sandy hair was immaculately styled. But there was something different in his face, a tightness around his mouth, a faint pallor beneath his carefully maintained composure. He still folded his hands neatly, but his fingers were no longer completely still. At exactly 9:03 a.m., Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered. Judge Whitaker was a woman in her early 60s with sharp cheekbones and steel-gray hair cut short at the jaw. Her reputation in Cook County was one of uncompromising clarity. Years earlier, she had presided over a corruption case that exposed city officials. Since then, she had developed little tolerance for theatrics. Her posture behind the bench was straight, authoritative without excess. "Proceed," she said calmly. Lisa Monroe rose. She wore a navy suit that matched her composed expression. There was no dramatic pause, no raised voice. Just order. "Your Honor," she began, "we present consolidated evidence establishing that Mr. Marcus Reed did not breach North River Analytics' data security system. Instead, the breach required insider knowledge and was executed by another authorized individual." She nodded toward the screen. The first slide displayed financial records. Exhibit A, Lisa continued, a deposit of $2,400,000 transferred into Mr. Ethan Blake's personal account from Marston Advisory Group, a consulting entity linked directly to Orion Metrics. The courtroom shifted audibly. Ethan's face remained controlled, but the color drained from it slightly. Lisa moved to the next slide. Detailed transaction logs. These funds were transferred 3 days after the data breach. William Carter leaned forward sharply. Objection. Speculation. Judge Whitaker raised a hand. Overruled for now. Continue. Lisa nodded once. Exhibit B. Forensic analysis of North River's laser grid recalibration. Expert testimony will confirm the system was deliberately suppressed for 4 minutes and 3 seconds, precisely the time required to access and exit the vault undetected. Dr. Howard Klein was called to the stand. He adjusted his glasses nervously before speaking, but his voice was steady once he began. He explained the micro-timing inconsistencies in the retinal scan log. He detailed how administrative override privileges could mask biometric traces. His language was technical, precise, unembellished. In my professional opinion, he concluded, only someone with advanced internal knowledge of the system's architecture could have executed this breach. Lisa approached again. Exhibit C. Previously unexamined parking garage footage. The screen displayed the dark SUV entering the underground garage. The image sharpened gradually. Daniel Cho had provided the enhancement work. The contours were unmistakable. Lisa overlaid the vehicle registration data. Registered to Mr. Ethan Blake. A murmur swept the room. Ethan's jaw tightened. Exhibit D, Lisa continued. Sole pattern analysis. A magnified image of the hexagonal shoe imprint appeared beside a photograph from the corporate gala showing Ethan wearing Arvelli shoes. The visual comparison required no commentary. William Carter turned slowly toward Ethan, confusion overtaking his features. "Ethan?" he whispered hoarsely. Ethan did not answer. Lisa's final slide displayed the call metadata linking Ethan to the Marston Advisory Group. "No external hacker bypassed this system," Lisa said clearly. This was an internal exploitation. For the first time, Ethan's composure fractured. "That proves nothing," he snapped suddenly, voice sharper than anyone had heard before. "Correlation is not guilt." Lisa met his gaze calmly. "Then explain the transfer." Silence. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. "Mr. Blake, you may respond." Ethan swallowed. His smooth demeanor had evaporated. A thin sheen of perspiration appeared along his hairline. His carefully folded hands were now clenched. "It was consulting compensation," he said weakly. "For what service?" Lisa pressed. Ethan hesitated too long. William Carter stared at him, disbelief turning to something heavier. Betrayal. "You told me everything was contained," William said under his breath. The room seemed to shrink. When the bank transfer confirmation page appeared, digitally authenticated and time-stamped, the defense table fell silent. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened. "Court officers," she said evenly. 2 uniformed officers stepped forward from the back of the room. Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly as they approached. For a moment he looked smaller, not physically but in presence. The confidence that once shielded him had collapsed. "You are under arrest for corporate espionage and violation of federal data security statutes," one officer stated clearly. Ethan did not resist. As they placed him in handcuffs, William Carter stood abruptly. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice cracking. He took one step backward, then another. His hand reached for the edge of the table but missed. His face drained of color. The next sound was the heavy thud of his body hitting the floor. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Angela's grip tightened instinctively around Marcus's hand. Her fingers pressed into his palm, anchoring him. Paramedics rushed forward. William lay pale against the polished wood floor, eyes closed, chest rising shallowly. Shock had overtaken him. Through the chaos, Marcus remained still. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He simply watched. Noah, seated behind his parents, stared wide-eyed but unafraid. There was no confusion in his expression, only understanding. The system had not corrected itself quietly, it had required exposure. Judge Whittaker restored order after several tense minutes. "Mr. Marcus Reed," she said finally, her voice carrying across the silent room. "The evidence presented today strongly indicates you were not responsible for the breach. Formal exoneration proceedings will follow." Marcus inclined his head slightly. He felt no surge of triumph, only relief. Measured and contained. Outside, snow continued to fall lightly against the courthouse steps. Inside, Ethan Blake was escorted through a side door, his polished shoes scuffing faintly against the tile. The truth had not shouted. It had unfolded. And the courtroom, moments earlier thick with accusation, now held only the quiet weight of revelation. Angela exhaled slowly. Noah's eyes remained fixed on his father, pride unmistakable. Marcus stood, posture steady as order returned to the room. The cracks had become fractures, and the fractures had finally broken. Chicago's sky cleared the morning of the final ruling. The snow that had fallen days earlier clung to shaded sidewalks, but sunlight now reflected off the glass towers downtown, bright and almost cleansing. The air remained cold, sharp against the lungs, but there was movement in it like something had shifted. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was no longer tense in the same way it had been before. It was quieter, heavier with conclusion rather than suspense. Marcus Reed stood beside Lisa Monroe once more. His posture was as steady as it had been on the first day, but there was a visible difference now. Not pride, not triumph, clarity. His charcoal suit was pressed cleanly. His expression was calm, almost reflective. Weeks of accusation had carved deeper patience into him. Angela sat in the second row, hands folded over her coat. She looked composed, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived under public doubt. Her shoulders were straight. She had endured whispered conversations in staff rooms, cautious glances from parents, subtle distance from colleagues. She had said nothing publicly. She had waited. Noah sat beside her, back straight, his navy blazer fitting better than it had weeks ago, as though he had grown slightly during the storm. He no longer looked uncertain. He looked older. At the front of the courtroom, William Carter sat alone at the defense table. He appeared diminished. The controlled executive posture was gone. His shoulders slumped slightly, his silver hair less meticulously arranged. A faint bruise marked his temple from where he had struck the floor during his collapse. His pale blue eyes were no longer sharp. They were tired. Judge Eleanor Whittaker entered precisely at 9 a.m. She reviewed her notes briefly, then looked toward Marcus. "After review of all presented evidence," she said clearly, "this court finds that Mr. Marcus Reed did not engage in corporate espionage, nor did he breach North River Analytics security protocols. The charges against him are dismissed in full." A breath seemed to release collectively across the room. Marcus did not move immediately. Judge Whittaker continued. "Furthermore, North River Analytics is ordered to issue formal restitution for reputational damages and financial loss incurred during these proceedings." There it was, vindication. But what followed was not scripted. Lisa touched Marcus's arm lightly, a silent acknowledgement that this was his moment. Marcus rose slowly. He did not look at the cameras. He did not look at the gallery. He looked at the bench. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "I am grateful for the court's clarity." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I respectfully decline the financial restitution." A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Lisa turned her head slightly, but she did not interrupt. Judge Whittaker raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Reed, you are not obligated to refuse." Marcus nodded once. "I understand." He turned then, not toward the judge, but toward the room. "Justice is not always about money," he said, voice steady, resonant without being loud. What I needed was the truth to be seen. What I need is respect. A workplace where no one is judged by the color of their skin, where suspicion is not built on stereotypes, where character is measured by actions, not assumptions. The words were simple, direct. Do not let prejudice guide judgment, he continued, because when it does, the innocent pay the price. Silence filled the room. It was not uncomfortable. It was reflective. Angela's eyes glistened, but she did not wipe them. Noah's chin lifted slightly, pride unmistakable. At the back of the courtroom stood a woman who had not been there before. Cynthia Morales, North River's newly appointed interim chief operating officer. Cynthia was in her early 50s, medium height, with dark hair streaked lightly with gray and intelligent brown eyes that observed carefully before speaking. She had built her career rebuilding organizations after leadership failures. Years earlier, she had helped restructure a tech firm after a discrimination lawsuit exposed systemic bias. Since then, she had been known as someone who confronted culture as much as policy. She listened closely. After adjournment, reporters gathered again on the courthouse steps. This time, the tone had shifted. Questions were less accusatory, more reflective. William Carter appeared before them, supported lightly by a legal aide. His suit hung more loosely than before. He looked older than his 55 years. I was wrong, he said into the cluster of microphones. His voice trembled slightly, but he did not look away. I allowed suspicion to override judgment, and I failed to protect a man who dedicated 15 years to this company. There were no excuses in his statement. Back inside North River's headquarters that afternoon, Cynthia Morales convened an emergency executive session. She stood at the head of the long conference table, posture firm. This company does not survive this by issuing a press release, she said evenly. We survive by restructuring how we think. Her tone was calm, but unyielding. She announced immediate reforms: independent oversight of executive authority, revised internal whistleblower protections, mandatory equity and ethics training at every level of management. This was not only a security breach, she added, it was a cultural breach. Across the city, Angela returned to her classroom the next day. Students watched her differently now, not with curiosity but respect. One student approached after class. Mrs. Reed, the girl said quietly, my mom saw your husband's speech. She said it mattered. Angela smiled softly. It did. At school, Noah's science fair speech had gained attention beyond the district. A local community newsletter published excerpts under the headline, Integrity Means Standing Firm. He did not boast about it. But when a classmate approached him and said, Your dad's cool, Noah simply nodded. That evening, the Reed family sat together in their living room for the first time without tension pressing between them. Snow outside reflected soft light through the window. Marcus leaned back in his chair, Angela beside him. You could have taken the money, Angela said quietly. He smiled faintly. That wasn't the point. She studied him for a moment. You know, not everyone would have done that. He shook his head gently. Maybe, but if I took it, the story becomes about compensation. I want it to remain about accountability. Across town, William Carter sat alone in his office for what might be the last time. The once confident executive now stared at the Chicago skyline with different eyes. He had built his career on control, on decisiveness. But control without humility had nearly destroyed a man's reputation. He exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, he did not make a call. He did not draft a statement. He simply sat with consequence. The next morning's headlines did not scream scandal. They carried Marcus's words instead. Justice is not always money. The article quoted his statement in full. By midday, the phrase had circulated widely. Inside the courthouse records, the official notation was simple. Charges dismissed. Exonerated. But beyond paperwork, something quieter had taken root. Respect demanded. Prejudice challenged. Truth affirmed. Marcus stood outside the courthouse once more before leaving, sunlight reflecting sharply against the winter sky. He did not look victorious. He looked steady, vindicated. Chicago moved differently after a storm. The snow that had once blanketed sidewalks now melted into narrow streams along the curb. The river reflected pale winter sunlight, steady and unhurried. Life had resumed its rhythm, but something intangible had shifted beneath it. Marcus Reed stood in the lobby of North River Analytics for the first time since the verdict. The glass doors slid open with their usual mechanical precision, but the air inside felt different. Conversations did not stop when he entered. They paused briefly, then resumed with acknowledgement instead of suspicion. He wore a simple navy suit, no tie. His posture was upright, calm as ever. But there was something lighter in his eyes now. Not relief exactly, but clarity sharpened by experience. Cynthia Morales waited near the elevator bank. She extended her hand before he reached her. Cynthia, poised and observant, carried authority without intimidation. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore a tailored gray suit that reflected neither excess nor modesty, only intention. "Welcome back, Marcus," she said. He nodded once. "Thank you." Inside the executive conference room, the board sat in quiet anticipation. Several members who had previously avoided direct eye contact now met his gaze steadily. Cynthia spoke first. "The board has unanimously voted to reinstate you as Senior Director of Cybersecurity Architecture. Effective immediately, your authority expands beyond system oversight. You will chair an independent ethics and oversight committee." Marcus absorbed the words without visible reaction. He had considered declining entirely. The thought had crossed his mind more than once. But leaving would mean surrendering the system to the same flaws that nearly destroyed him. "I accept," he said evenly. A subtle shift moved through the room. Not applause, not celebration. Respect. "I'm not returning for reputation," Marcus added calmly. "I'm returning to strengthen what failed." Cynthia inclined her head slightly. "That's exactly why we asked." Across the city, Angela Reed stood before her classroom once again. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, catching chalk dust in the air. She wore a forest green cardigan over a simple blouse, her curls pulled back neatly as always. But something in her presence had deepened. When she spoke about civil rights movements that week, her voice carried lived conviction rather than distant history. She did not reference her family's experience directly. She didn't need to. "Institutions don't correct themselves," she told her students gently. "People correct them." Her students listened more closely now. Even the quieter ones seemed attentive. After class, a young boy named Trevor approached her desk. Trevor was small for his age, freckled, often hesitant to speak in groups. His parents had recently immigrated, and he struggled with confidence. "Mrs. Reed," he said quietly, "my dad said what your husband did was brave." Angela smiled softly. "Standing up for what's right isn't always loud," she replied. "Sometimes it's just steady." At home that evening, Noah climbed a step stool to hang his science fair ribbon in the living room. The ribbon was simple, blue fabric first place, but he treated it carefully. Marcus watched from the couch. "You're putting it there?" he asked. Noah nodded. "So we remember." Marcus smiled faintly. "Remember what?" "That truth takes work," Noah said. Noah had grown in ways that were not measured by height alone. The weeks of uncertainty had matured him quietly. He no longer flinched when classmates mentioned the trial. He answered questions calmly. Later that night, Marcus walked into the backyard alone. The cold air had softened. Winter was beginning its slow retreat. He reflected not on victory, but on responsibility. Back at North River, change did not happen instantly. Cynthia implemented mandatory ethics training sessions led by external consultants. One of them was Dr. Samuel Green. Dr. Green was in his late 40s, tall and slender with salt and pepper hair and warm, deliberate eyes. He spoke with a calm cadence that invited reflection rather than defensiveness. Years earlier, he had left a lucrative consulting role after witnessing systemic bias dismissed as corporate culture. Since then, he had devoted his career to rebuilding ethical frameworks in organizations. In the first session, he stood before executives who once measured success only in quarterly reports. "Prejudice doesn't always shout," Dr. Green said quietly. "Sometimes it whispers in assumptions." Marcus listened from the back of the room. He did not dominate discussion. He observed. William Carter attended those sessions as well. He no longer occupied the head of the table. His role had shifted, reduced voluntarily after the scandal. His once rigid demeanor had softened. He listened more than he spoke now. After one session, he approached Marcus privately. "I failed you," William said quietly. Marcus met his gaze without hostility. "Yes," he replied, "but what matters now is what you build next." William nodded slowly. For perhaps the first time in his career, humility replaced certainty. Outside the corporate sphere, the Reed family's life resumed its rhythm. Angela continued guiding students beyond textbooks. She organized a new school initiative titled Integrity in Action, encouraging students to examine real-world ethical dilemmas. Noah began mentoring younger students interested in robotics. He did not present himself as exceptional. He presented himself as consistent. One afternoon, as Marcus left North River after a long but ordinary day of meetings, he paused outside the building. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, bathed in late afternoon sunlight. The river reflected gold and silver tones, steady and unbroken. He had walked out of a courthouse under similar light days earlier, but that moment had been about defense. This moment was about direction. Angela met him later near the courthouse plaza. She had suggested they pass by it once more before heading home. They stood side by side on the stone steps where cameras had once crowded. Now the plaza was quiet. Marcus took a slow breath. He was not a man who celebrated publicly. He did not lift his arms in triumph. He did not posture for photographs. He stepped forward, not as a victor over an enemy, but as a man restored to his own name. The sun lowered slowly behind the skyline. Justice had been carried out through law, but dignity had been reclaimed through choice. Marcus descended the courthouse steps into the fading light, not as someone who had won, but as someone who had stood, and in standing, protected more than his career. He had protected his character. This story reminds us that truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it stands quietly in the middle of accusation and refuses to move. Marcus was not saved by anger. He was not saved by revenge. He was saved by integrity, patience, and the courage to demand evidence instead of accepting prejudice. In everyday life, most of us will not stand in a courtroom accused of corporate espionage. But we will face moments where we are misunderstood. We will meet situations where assumptions are made about us based on appearance, background, or silence. The lesson is simple but powerful. Do not let other people's bias define your worth, and do not let your own bias define someone else. Prejudice often hides inside small comments, quick judgments, and comfortable stereotypes. It grows when no one challenges it. Justice is not only a legal concept, it is a daily decision. It is how we treat co-workers who are different from us. It is how we speak about people who are not in the room. It is how we respond when someone is falsely accused. Marcus refused money because he understood something deeper. Respect cannot be purchased. Dignity cannot be negotiated. Character is built in silence long before it is tested in public. This story challenges all of us. Are we quick to assume or slow to understand? Do we defend truth even when it is uncomfortable? Do we correct injustice even when it costs us something? If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. What part of the story spoke to you the most? Your voice matters. Subscribe to the channel if you believe in stories that defend integrity, courage, and fairness. Together, we can build conversations that challenge discrimination and promote respect. May God bless you and your family with wisdom, strength, and discernment. And if you believe that truth always finds its way to the light, write Amen in the comments and stand for justice in your own life.